I want to take a moment to acknowledge Dr. Christy Cooper, Lucy, Kami, Val, Laura, Wendy, and this incredible children's ministry team, a group of amazing volunteers. And not a lot of people know that there is an all different church growing up in the other side of the campus. There have been many people coming here and sitting there, this is the church. This is only half of the church. There is another building, there are other buildings and another generation growing up, and I'm incredibly proud to be part of what God is doing. And if statistics is right, and our children's ministry has doubled since COVID, and God is doing something amazing. So you should all be praying for them. Thank you. As you saw in the children's ministry video, the Palm Sunday begins with celebration, but ends with Jesus in tears. When you really look at Palm Sunday, go back and read the story, and it is the beginning of the end in some way, the beginning of his passion. There is pain and there is agony, and right after the celebration, Jesus goes around and crying for the city and what is to come. So I'm going to make that pivot by sharing a story from my own life. Year 1991, I was a senior in my engineering college. A group of students from the same university, a group of medical students from the same university went on a hiking trip to the mountains. And while on their way, they were crossing a dry riverbed. There was no water when they entered the riverbed. But while they were midway in that trail, there was this unexpected flash flood. Water came pouring down from the mountain, surging down and surrounding them. They couldn't even move, like a raging torrent. And 8 students, medical students, were swept away and died in that incident. I remember that very clearly. I was a new Christian at the time, and that is the first time I asked the question of theodicy. How can God let this happen? It's not the death in itself, the bizarre nature of this group of students are right caught in the middle of the water, and people tried to help them, but they couldn't because the water was just surging down. And so everybody was standing in horror, watching these kids, 19 to 20, I was at that age, somewhere around that age too, and they kind of swept away down into the valley, died. And this is a question, and especially as a pastor, one of the difficult part of my job is carrying this burden and pain. And I keep asking this question every week, and this week in particular. Some of you know Brother Marshall, who used to running around and taking pictures here. He passed away unexpectedly last Sunday. It was a difficult time for me because, I was sitting with him in the hospital and chatting and, come back and take some pictures and make me look good. And I was talking to him over phone, and suddenly got the news. And if you have read the book we published last year, Beatitudes, The Blessing of the Kingdom, it is a picture book actually, and all pictures are taken by Marshall, and people who read the book praise the pictures more than the writing that I have done. But I was just asking, why Marshall? Why? That age-old question, why bad things happen to good people. So these are some of the struggle that we all carry, and what we are doing, what we have been doing. And if you're new here because it's Palm Sunday, sorry, you walked into the middle of a very, very heavy series we have been doing in the last 3 weeks, and this is the 4th and final week. First week, we saw the moral evil in the world, which is caused by human free will and God's helplessness to prevent that. And in the second week, we saw the natural evil created by a God with small g, and how God cares for his people by building the hedge of protection around them. And last week, we saw the suffering hero who enters into the middle of our suffering and suffering with the sufferer so that nobody suffers alone. And also in our suffering, we become more like him. And that's what we saw last week. So today, we are going to look at the title of the sermon is The Cessation of Suffering, the end of suffering. And I told you the suffering is going to end in the redeemed world. You remember we talked about 3 different worlds. There was a perfect world, there is a fallen world in which we live right now. There is a future world, which is the redeemed world in which the suffering will end. But is there a way, is there a possibility for the cessation of suffering in this fallen world? Maybe there is. So that's what we are going to look at. So what I want to do, what I want to ask you is that if you haven't heard all the sermons in the series, I encourage you to go to our YouTube page and watch all the sermons so that you'll get a clarity of what we are saying. If you're in the middle of it, you might get confused. And I also want you to write down some of your questions. Some of you have been sending your questions to me. But we have a special session, I think it's April 25th, the kitchen table arranged by our Next Gen Ministries. They are putting together a kitchen table session where you can ask some of these questions so that I can answer or at least wrestle with these questions together. So that's the plan. Would you stand with me for the reading of the word today? This is a very, very popular verse, and I think some of you might have memorized it, just only one word. So I'm thinking maybe we can read it together. It's Romans chapter 8:28. Yes, can we read this together? Romans 8:28. And we know that God causes all things to work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose. This is the word of the Lord. You may be seated. Friedrich Nietzsche was a very, I don't want to call him notorious, but from a Christian perspective, a notorious atheist philosopher, made this statement. This is what he said, Nietzsche. A man who has a why to live will always find the how. A man who has a why to live will always find the how. What he means is that if we know the purpose of the experience we are going through, however difficult that experience is, however painful that experience is, that we will be able to tolerate it. Only if we know why we are going through it. Only if we can understand the meaning of the suffering. I was thinking about the delivery of our first baby, Hannah. When Hannah came to this world, I was in the delivery room with Joanne. It was me and Joanne's mom with Joanne. And right from the delivery, pain started. Right at that moment, Joanne's mom fainted. She couldn't watch her daughter going through it, so they had to carry her out. And I was just standing there. It was a very traumatic experience for me to watch my wife going through that experience to deliver the baby. And I remember saying that, man, I will never put her through this experience ever again. Okay? But in a year or so came Emma. Okay? Again, that's because Joanne insisted. Joanne wanted to go for more and more, but I said, no, that's it. It's not going to happen. You can adopt if you want. I'm not going to put you through this experience again, because from where I stand as a man, I'll never experience the labor pain, but from where I stand, that's probably one of the most painful things that I have witnessed. Yet, almost all the women I have met somehow find that experience meaningful. Even people who can have babies, they would love to. They crave for that experience because it is a meaningful experience. Painful, yes, but also meaningful. See, this is the mystery. Suffering ceases to be suffering when it has meaning. I'll say that one more time. Suffering ceases to be suffering when it has meaning. That is why soldiers march to the enemy lines. That's why martyrs give their life for the cause they believe in with joy. That's why doctors and nurses, confront contagious disease, risking their life, going to work. That's because even though it is a kind of suffering, they find meaning in that suffering. Then that suffering doesn't become suffering anymore. It is pain, not suffering. There is a distinction. Okay? Now, the existential purpose of all religions, in one way or the other, is to attribute some kind of meaning to suffering. Because all religions and philosophies know that if we can somehow attribute to a meaning to the suffering we are going through, then that serves a purpose for us to have a normal life, we can call it, right? Cessation of suffering. So there are three ways of religions attributing meaning to life. So I'm going to go through this quickly. The first, I call it retributive meaning. Retributive meaning. This is easy for you to understand. Because religions generally, including a version of Christian religions, teach us that suffering is punitive, which really means that God rewards the just and punishes the wicked, right? So when you are going through some suffering, that means that God is punishing you for something that you have done. That's what, it's a retribution, retributive meaning. And obviously, if you are a Christian, you know that stands on false premise, because if you go to the Old Testament, one of the nicest guys you see in the Old Testament, God himself testified him as morally upright and almost a perfect man, is Job. And Job is the one who went through probably the worst kind of suffering in the Old Testament. It was not retributive. And then you come to the New Testament, like I said last week, the best possible human being ever lived, who have ever committed any sins, is identified as the man of sorrows, acquainted with grief, right? So suffering is not retributive. Suffering can be retributive based on certain circumstances, but we cannot provide a retributive meaning to suffering. That's the problem with the whole prosperity theology and all. I don't want to get into that. You are smart enough to understand that, right? So that's the way of retributive meaning. And the second one, I call it is a retroactive meaning. Again, I'm coining up this. I didn't read it in any text, and this is the way I process it. Retroactive meaning is particularly in Eastern religions. You might have heard about the law of karma, right? Karma. Karma, generally people think that it's like reap what you sow kind of a thing. It's almost like retributive. Like, you're going to suffer the consequences of the sins you have committed. Yes, but there is much more to it. So the law of karma, I'm not going to give you a religion class. When I do the Mosaic class, you're welcome. But the law of karma conceptualizes different lives. There are multiple lives, reincarnation and all of that. What the law of karma teaches us is that whatever sins we commit in this world, the effect of will be carried over to the next world. And then you suffer in the next world or be rewarded in the next world. And it is a cyclical cycle of life, which really means that whatever some of the natural evil or something that we suffer in this world is because of what we have done in our previous lives. That is the problem with the law of karma, because I still remember in my world religions class in the University of Toronto, the professor was, eloquently explaining the Eastern religious philosophy. A Jewish woman stood up and said, "Professor, can I ask you something?" "Yes." So she said, "Does that mean that the 6 million Jews who went through Holocaust, they were all some bad, evil thugs in the previous life? That's what you are saying?" And I remember the professor standing there in silence for a minute, and he said, I don't believe so, but that's what the law of karma says, because that's the only way to explain that, the philosophy of the retroactive. Your suffering is retroactive. When Hurricane Katrina came and a Buddhist bhikkhu, a Buddhist, their priest, got into trouble for saying that Hurricane Katrina happened, all those people suffered because all these people carried over their sins from the past lives. Again, he is wrong, but that's the only way Buddhism can explain. The only way Buddhism can explain the tragedy that happened in Altadena and Palisade is somehow the people in Altadena and Palisade have done something worse than people who live in Pasadena or San Gabriel. Believe it or not. That's a very inhuman philosophy. I don't want to get into that. But that's a majority religion, by the way, in the world. Even it is creeping into the Western world. People don't understand the evil nature of some of this Eastern religious philosophy. But anyway, that's a different story for a different time. But the third one, I believe, is the Christian way of looking. The third way of attributing meaning to suffering, I call it redemptive meaning. Redemptive meaning. That's the verse we read today. Romans 8:28, famous verse, right? God causes everything to work together for good. You have heard that verse, you have heard sermons on this verse. So let me use an analogy that how I experience. Joanne is not with me today, as you probably have seen. She is away for a week visiting her parents in Canada. So I thought this is a good time for me to try some cooking, okay? I know there is a fake media narrative out there that Pastor Mathew cannot cook. That is so not true. I can cook coffee, I can cook breakfast, I can cook many things. So I thought, I'll try Indian food, right? Like I'll try to cook Indian food. And some of you, I believe most of you like Indian food, the colorful, flavorful Indian food. So I opened the forbidden racks, forbidden shelves in my kitchen. Nobody's there to question me anyway. I'm just going through the ingredients one after the other. Some of it I have difficulty even reading. Cumin, garam masala, Kashmiri pepper, and all of this kind of stuff. Like there's a rack of spice and herbs neatly arranged. And I tried one of them, each individually. When you try it, you have no idea. It's such a revolting taste. It's pungent. None of it, not even one ingredient, you cannot put it in your mouth. It's that bad, right? So when you try to cook this stuff, unless you are a skilled chef, what you're going to make is non-palatable. You cannot eat it. It's just like, any Tom, Dick, and Harry can make a steak. I can make a steak too. It may not taste that great, the right temperature and all of that. Any Tom, Dick, and Harry can make breakfast. But to make Indian food or most of the ethnic food, you really have to be a skilled chef. Otherwise, it's not that it would be bad. It can't even taste it. It's just, it's not edible. It's not edible. So I found out that this week, how that all works. So, But the point I'm trying to make is, somehow in the hand of a skilled chef, all these ingredients which are individually non-palatable come together to make something flavorful, colorful, tasty, that everybody loves. So it is not about the ingredients, but it is about the chef that makes something out of this apparently bad ingredient to make something beautiful, something really good. See, this is why, you have heard this phrase continuously expressed in our conversation. Say, everything happens for a reason, right? Everything happens for a reason. Some people get chastised for saying that, and how dare you say that? That's very insensitive to say when people are suffering, which is true theologically, especially if you have theologically trained ears. So I say the same thing when people are going through suffering in a different way. I say a different vocabulary, okay? So this is what I say. Instead of everything happens for a reason, I say everything happens can have meaning. Everything happens can have a meaning. So what that sentence does to the previous sentence is this. When you say everything happens for a reason, that really implies that God causes all these bad things to happen in your life so that he can produce something good out of it. So God is in the cause. God is in the cause. But when you say everything happens can have a meaning, what that puts is, instead of taking God out of the cause to the consequence, God is not in the cause, but God is in the consequence. Whatever happened to you, for whatever reason, whether it is a free will decision by you or it is something caused by the God with small g, it doesn't matter. At this point, we are not asking the question why, but we are asking the question what for? What for? What can we do in the consequence? So God is not in the cause, but in the consequence of suffering. I'll say that one more time. God is not in the cause, but in the consequence of suffering. When we take it to God, he has this magic formula of creating something good out of apparent evils. The formula is this: evil plus evil equal to complex good. That's the word I use. Evil plus evil equal to complex good. Because it's not good per se in the sense that I don't want to say that somehow this evil happened and God created something magical, but it is out of the various factors that emerged is not exactly the good that we were hoping for, but there is a complex good that God is creating out of this apparent evil. Now that is the mystery of the redemptive meaning God is doing in this world. See, I could go on, and I have a whole 2 or 3 sermons prepared on how God makes meaning out of our suffering, a meaning-making process. I have at least 2 or 3 sessions planned. But then I thought, I don't want to go too much. Eventually, the series on suffering will become a suffering in itself for you. So I didn't want to do it. So I'm going to give you a story. I hopefully illustrate this. This is a true story from my life, a way of God makes meaning out of our suffering. And I'm sure you have your stories too. 1998, Joanne and I got married. Soon after our wedding, we happened to attend a conference. There was this preacher. This was a family, a Hindu family, middle-aged Hindu family, and they are very high job and very well educated, and they were preaching the gospel. They were converts to Christianity. It was amazing. So we we befriended them and took them for dinner, and we ended up talking to them. So it's a husband and wife, and they had a son at that time going to high school or something like that. So we asked them, hey, how did you become Christians? And the father said, well, it was through our daughter who's no longer with us. So I said, what happened to your daughter? Well, they said, our daughter died in the flash flood incident in 1991. I said, wow, okay. Then what happened? I can't connect now. Well, then they went on to describe this story, bizarre story. Obviously, their daughter is Hindu. Her name is Asha, and I have a picture of Asha. I hope you can see it. That's the daughter. She's one of those girls who died. She was 19 or 20 at that time. She was a medical student or dentistry or whatever, medical college. She died in that accident, 1991, October 13. And her parents, there was obviously a traumatic incident for them, and they went after her funeral and everything, they went to the college dorm to collect her belongings. And they found her journal. She has a habit of writing journal or diary. And they took it, and the first page, the diary opens with this: It says, I am not... Wow. It says, I'm not ashamed of the gospel. That's the first page. This is a Hindu girl by Hindu parents. The first page, and they said, what in the world is happening? What is gospel? Then they started reading the journal. It so happens that this girl became a Christian through a college prayer group. She accepted Jesus. And every single day, she would write a letter to Jesus. It is almost like a love letter. And she surrendered her life to Jesus. And in all of this, every day, every single day, so they gave us that diary. So we actually saw that diary and held it in our hand. And I saw this in her handwriting. And in every day she would say, I'm so grateful for this, but why me? Why me? Why not my parents? Why not my brother? Why are they not seeing it? This was her prayer all along, right? And I remember seeing that diary, and she died in October. It's September. Her diary is actually an exegetical study of Romans. Each day, Romans chapter 2, Romans chapter 3, and the insights that I have seen in that diary, I cannot believe this is by a 19-year-old Hindu girl writing in her diary. It's almost like a theological treatise, but she ends with a love letter too. So I'll read a sample love letter she writes. There are many of them in that diary. This is one. I know, Abba, you chose me to serve you. Abba, help me to be with Jesus always. My mind, heart, thoughts, body, words, everything. Take it fully. Now I am yours, Abba. No one can take it. Thank you, Abba. Thank you so much. Your loving daughter, V. Asha. V stands for Velayudan, which is the name of a Hindu god. That's her surname, signed by a Hindu girl. And her diary is full of letters like this. And the parents looked at it, and the brother looked at it and said, this is exactly what we want. And this is exactly our daughter's prayer for us. And what broke me at the end of our conversation was, they said, you know, our daughter wanted to take baptism. We can read that from the diary, but she was afraid to tell us that she wanted to take baptism. But the Lord, the Christian God, allowed her to take baptism at her death. That flash flood for them was a baptism. I don't know. I'm trying not to go there psychologically. It was such a profound moment. You know, when I go to heaven and I know I'll see Jesus and everybody, I'm afraid of seeing Asha. Because I know Asha will ask me, probably if she lived today, she probably was of my age. I wonder what Asha will ask me. Mathew, what are you doing there in Pasadena, California? You know, so they wanted, the reason they visited us was that they wanted to write Asha's story in a booklet format. They wrote it in the local language. They wanted Joanne to translate it into English. So Joanne helped them translate this. This is around 15-page Asha story, and they published in 1998, written or translated by Joanne. And this became caught like a wildfire. This went to different universities and different college campuses, and they would get hundreds of letters from people who are accepting Jesus by reading Asha's story. And it has all these different excerpts from her letters and for studies and all of that. And I'm like, I wonder, seeing Asha when I go to heaven. And what did you do, Mathew? Well, Asha, I fixed the leak of the sprinkler last week, and there is some other stuff I did. But Asha, even today as we speak, through this book and her stories, and bringing many, many people to Christ after her death. I wonder, Asha's death had more meaning than my life. I wonder. Hope that is not true. But these are some of the things that go through my mind, The point I'm trying to make is, I'm not saying that what happened to Asha was caused by God. Is that? I don't know. But did God allow to lower the hedge of protection around her? Maybe. But something came out of this, which is magical, which is amazing, which is incredible, bringing many people to Christ even today as we speak. I'm sure I cannot match the number. I don't think I will ever have that many salvation counts in my ministry than Asha, who's a dead girl, 19 years old. She is still winning souls for Christ. I don't understand this. That's why I call it the complex good. I don't think it is the right kind of good, at least from my perspective. But God takes the evil plus evil and makes a complex good and find redemption in your suffering. As I close, I want us to go back to the story of Job. See, Job was going through this pain and the angst and the agony. And if you read his book, it is all about questions. Job is asking questions, tough questions to God. Depending on the translation you read, Job is asking almost 330 questions to God. And you see God is silent, God is not speaking. Then chapter 38, God breaks in. God breaks in chapter 38 and flips the script. And God is asking a series of questions to Job. 70 questions, depending on the translation you read. God is asking questions. Now, Job doesn't have any answer. Job doesn't know what to say. At the end, Job 42:6. His final word, the final word out of Job's mouth is something like this. He says, I have heard of you with my ears, but now with my eyes I see you. That is the end of his suffering. I might still be going through suffering, but now I have a beatific vision of the suffering hero. And I believe that Job had a vision of the cross, and the God who himself suffers, a God who himself asks questions, a God who himself experiences God-forsakenness. The beatific vision at the end of that story is what brings redemption to that story. And that's my prayer for you. In the middle of your suffering, the life may still be painful, but there is a way to cease suffering if you see the redemptive meaning on the suffering hero. If you have a beatific vision of the God who is suffering with you. Like I said, Christianity's answer to a suffering world is a suffering God. That is the beauty of Christianity. As I end this series, I'm going to invite the worship team to sing a prayer. Their next song is a prayer. I want us to pray that prayer as they sing. But one more excerpt from Asha's diary, and this would encapsulate everything I said in the series, I believe. So this is another excerpt from Asha's diary. How do we live in a suffering world? This is how. Asha, dead girl, 19 years old, 1991, says to us even now. This is Asha writing to herself. Do not plan now itself for your far future. This girl saw it was coming. I don't know how else to explain this. If I hadn't seen this diary, I wouldn't have believed it. This girl knew she's going to die. You can see that every part of that. So this is what she wrote. Do not plan now itself for your far future. Plan for today. That is now, not for tomorrow. One thing is sure, that God loves me so much because I am his loving daughter. And his only son, Jesus, is my loving brother, that he cares for me so much that's her dad and mom and brother. He is there to suffer for me. So whatever comes in future, he is there to suffer for me. His love is eternal. So I don't have a future plan of my own, but it is His. Asha. Amen.